Joining me now is the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, New Jersey Democratic Senator Bob Menendez. His committee is holding a hearing on Ukraine later this afternoon, and I know we're already tight on your schedule there, Senator. My apologies for that. Let me start right away. It doesn't seem anything we've done so far with sanctions, with the Europeans, with the United States, has worked to get Putin to back off. What do you do now?
Well, this is a question of continuing escalation of the pressures so that it's part of Putin's equation not to enter eastern Ukraine. Although at this point, without sending any of his troops over, although we believe he has some special forces in eastern Ukraine and certainly intelligence entities that are part of creating the unrest in various cities across eastern Ukraine, he is probably acquiring a lot of what he wants without having his troops cross into eastern Ukraine, and that's creating a turmoil for the Ukrainian government, creating separatist movements. And so the bottom line, in my view, is what we've done has been the right calibration, but we need more of it. So we have to look at companies like Rosneft, we have to look at Gazprom, right, and we have to look at Rosenborn exports, the arm exporter that's sending arms, for example, into Syria, and contemplate sanctioning companies as well as individuals. And I think those three, which the first two are creating enormous disruption in energy supplies in Ukraine and threaten other elements of Europe as well, would be pretty hard-hitting.
Would you do this without the Europeans, if necessary?
Well, look, I think that the Europeans are important. We have a $40 billion marketplace with Russia. They have a $500 billion marketplace with Russia. We need the Europeans to understand that it's in their own continental security that these issues are being fought out over. They're a little bit more cautious in calibrating about it, but so far American leadership has brought them to a certain point. I think American leadership may be necessary to bring them further down the road so that Putin, but understand strength, will ultimately not pursue the possibility of a military invasion.
All right, define what American leadership, though, is on that. Is that doing sectoral sanctions on our own and hoping the Europeans follow rather than waiting for the Europeans to agree?
Well, I think there are several more individuals who can be sanctioned. Sanctions like Igor Sechin are good ones. There's a few more. And then looking at specific companies which are targeted, not necessarily sectoral, are important. And then the last one that you consider are sectoral. But I think there's still some more to be done in targeted sanctions that aren't sectoral that I think the European Union would join us with and would hopefully get the Russians not to enter eastern Ukraine.
What would you tell a constituent about what U.S. national interest is in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, it is about making sure that countries that are trying to move to the West and to democracy, which means that we ultimately are more engaged in commerce and less likely to have any conflict with them, is in the national interest of the United States. And also, the world is watching what's happening in the Ukraine. China's watching to see what the United States and Europe do as it relates to Russia's aggression. They're looking at territories in the South China Sea that Japan and South Korea claim, which are our allies, and saying, well, if the West does nothing here against Putin, why not advance against those territories? Iran, that's negotiating with us across the table as to their nuclear weapons program, will decide, well, we can take this negotiation farther to our benefit, because at the end of the day, the West won't do anything. And I could go through a half a dozen countries in the world for which we have critical interests that are going to be calibrating based upon what we do here.
And I know trying to read Putin's mind is a task that not everybody succeeds at these days. Do you believe he just thought the U.S. would walk away, or Europe would just sort of let him do this the way, frankly, Europe has let him do this in smaller areas close to the Soviet Union, or the old Soviet Union, as he's been reaching out to these old republics? Did he just assume that we'd all look the other way?
No, I think Putin tests the extent to which the United States and Europe will act. I mean, you saw it in Georgia, you see it in Moldova now, of course, in Ukraine. And as I've said to our European allies when I've met with them both here and earlier this year in Brussels, they have to calibrate at what point their own security is involved and what messages they send to the Russians. But Putin only understands strength, and that's either military or economic strength. We're certainly not talking about military actions here, but we can clearly send him an economic message. And since Russia's economy is no longer the old Soviet Union command and control economy, its economy can be affected by our collective actions.
Do you want this action, before I let you go, do you want the U.S. to take more action before the May 25th elections?
Well, I want to do everything possible to make sure the May 25th election takes place. I think that's an important foundation for Ukraine moving forward, and I think we should calibrate what is necessary to do that, and we'll have to see that as each day passes by. You know, this Friday, May 9th, is Victory Day for the Russians, what they consider the victory, the victory over the Nazis. And right. In Putin's, painting of the picture of fascism and everything else, as he did in Crimea, as it relates to the Kiev government, I think this Friday is going to be a milestone we'll have to watch.
Very interesting. Senator Bob Menendez, Chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Thank you for coming on again. I know we held you over a little bit longer than we had said. My apologies for that.
No problem.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.